Hello and welcome to or welcome back to Sharp Scratch. This is a podcast brought to you by the BMJ, where medical students, resident doctors and expert guests come together to discuss the things that you need to know to be a good doctor, but you might not get taught at medical school. I'm your host, Zaynah Khan, a medical student in London, and this year the BMJ's editorial scholar, running all things BMJ student. Today's episode is really exciting because we're doing like a Christmas special and we've got some brilliant people with us today. First, I'd like to introduce to you Nikki, who is on our panel. Would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Yes, thanks for having me back. My name is Nikki. I'm a FY2 Doctor in Surrey, and a couple of years ago I was in Zaynah's seat, so I'm the past host of Sharp Scratch as well, so always exciting to be back.
I wonder if OG fans remember.
They're probably, hopefully, doctors now as well.
And today our expert guest is Matt Morgan. I'm really excited to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the invite. There's two bits to my life, I suppose. I'm a full-time NHS intensive care consultant in Cardiff by day, which is where I'm speaking to you from, in a little village just outside of Cardiff. But the other bit of my life, which I'm now passionate about, is public engagement, writing, having written some books, done some stuff for the media, and a columnist for the BMJ.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and I hope we have a good episode. I've seen some of the things that you've written for the BMJ, and I've got to say that they really excited me because I really enjoy words. And I guess that was kind of the idea of today's episode. One thing that I think about is, I don't know if it's like a normal quote that people say in hospitals or like an actual famous patient said it or something. But you know how there's a patient that says, this is just an average day of work for you, but this is like the most important moment of my life. And I thought that was an interesting thing because there's so many experiences that we have in the healthcare world that become almost mundane for us because we're dealing with it day in, day out. But if you think about it, like for the general public or someone not in healthcare, these are really weird things that we go through. So I thought that's something that we could explore today, because often when we're trying to describe these things, for example, to family or other people who might not be in healthcare, we don't quite have the words to describe what's actually going on, like the feelings that we're having or the sensory experience of it all. So I guess the limitations of language in trying to encapsulate those emotions and experiences we have. And I thought that's something that we could discuss a little bit today. Nikki, you're nodding. Do you have any experiences of that?
No, definitely. I think it's really important. It's something I think about quite often, that how weird it is that my like day-to-day environment that almost feels like you're at school with all your friends in the same environment, friends and colleagues, and we sit around in the canteen and that's our day-to-day like place of work, but actually around us are a lot of people who it's their worst day, and it's that kind of balance of making sure that your tone and things are all correct when you're in those environments and acknowledging that, because you have to make certain things more kind of palatable for your day to day. And it's not that you're not allowed to enjoy being there or like have a laugh or anything with your friends, but especially in places like the canteen, the corridors, places like that, it's really important to be aware of. So that's something that was really resonating with me as you were speaking. But you're right, I think also then speaking about those experiences to those people who've got less experience of that can be quite difficult to capture.
Matt, I was wondering what your thoughts were on this.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately words have power. You know, they are probably the most important instruments we have as doctors, and also, therefore, the most dangerous too. You know, we've known for a long time that most complaints come through communication issues, but I think so does most care, actually. And it's where you're at that limit of where there aren't treatments that help, or it's a mystery diagnosis. You know, that's when words really come into their own. I think what you said at the beginning is amazing. It reminds me of a quote by, I think it's Derek Silvers, who says, "What's obvious to you is amazing to others." And if you think back to even your most mundane day at work in the last week or the last month, that's still an amazing experience to many people in the world. And to finish on one final quote, I think this is now how I think about words and language in medicine. That's from Ludwig Wittgenstein, who is a Austro-British philosopher. He said, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." And I think that's so important in medicine, because if you haven't got a way to describe something, to communicate something, then you can't see that. You can't make that real. And I think we should remember that as doctors and as healthcare professionals.
Definitely. I think that's something that I try to remember when I'm on placement as well. I feel like often, even the most mundane stuff, like as a medical student, I'm not doing the same things that you are, but
Can I
even
just say I'm definitely not doing what an ICU consultant's doing either.
But even stuff like the small things, like getting a cup of tea for a patient or whatever, and
Makes
having
such a difference.
yeah, but like having the time, like that extra 10 minutes that I have to talk to them that maybe a certain doctor won't, can make such a big difference. And I feel like remembering that it's like an honor and a privilege to
for sure.
like be with this patient when they're in the most vulnerable state, I guess, and that they're trusting you with that amenity almost. Yeah, so I think that's something to remember. I guess touching back now on the language aspect of it, I guess this is both for Matt and Nikki if you want to jump in, but how have you found then kind of describing your clinical experiences to friends or family who may not be in medicine? Like how have you found translating those experiences and trying to capture those emotions to them?
Wow, yeah, that's a tricky one. I think ultimately, as doctors and healthcare professionals, if you chop me in half right now, and I think if you chop all of us in half, what would spill out are stories, I think, ultimately. And yeah, maybe they would be in the form of words, but most of the time they are in the form of, people you've met, families you've interacted with, patients you've cared for. And it's tricky in medicine because we also have confidentiality. And so, there's nothing more I'd want than to come home after a really tough day where something's not gone the way you want, or something's gone amazingly, and tell my family. I've got two girls who are 16 and 13, tell them all about it, tell my wife all about it. But it's tricky because of confidentiality. Often you can't. And so I think that's why, in many ways, in medicine, we've kind of invented our own language. We've invented our own experiences and words. And in the Christmas BMJ, it's coming out this Christmas, and this is a Christmas episode. I've tried to capture some of those experiences in made-up words, if you like, and hopefully that's a way of explaining to my family the amazing things we see and do, but without being reported to the GMC.
That's so exciting. Could you tell us more about that? Like the process, what led you to want to do that?
Yeah, I haven't always been interested in words and writing. I'm a geek. I'm a scientist at heart. In fact, I genuinely misspelt my name in school. I've got a weird French middle name. Not Matt. I could spell Matt, but it was a weird French middle name. So this has never been a massive thing for me until I started writing myself, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. But there's some books I loved growing up, and I remember having a book called Douglas Adams' The Meaning of Life. Douglas Adams, of course, the famous writer from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But he wrote this weird dictionary of strange terms which are missing from the English language but should be there. One I always remember is he invented called kettering, which is the marks left on your bottom after sitting on a wicker chair, And I loved those kind of words. And then through the years, I've also read other kind of dictionaries, a bit like the Profanosaurus from Viz, which is very non-PC. And this summer, I came across a book I've got here actually called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, and it describes some of the sorrows in life which don't have names for them. And I thought this was amazing, and I got back from that holiday thinking, well, what about medicine? There's things we see every day that don't have words. So I started a dictionary called the Dictionary of Blood and Silence as an online venture. I've asked people to submit words, and before I know it, there's over 200 words now, which we experience every day, but there isn't a word for. Probably one of my favourite is vein spotting, which is the activity when you're walking down the street or sitting in a cafe and looking at somebody's hands and arms and wondering what size cannula you can get in there, for example. That's one of my favourites.
That's quite fun now, because I feel like now I will be trying to spot people vein spotting when I'm on the tube.
That's very meta. You need a new word for the act of spotting vein spotting.
And it's just going to be a cycle and keep going. Um, But yeah, we've actually had a look at some of the words that you have in your dictionary, because there's going to be an advent calendar on the BMJ website, which when this episode comes out, you should be able to see. But yeah, we had a go at looking at 12 or so, and we thought that we could go through some of them, but we've asked in the group chat of panelists what they think the words might mean before telling them the meaning. So I thought that
So because we already could see the definitions with them as we were kind of working with the Christmas issue of the BMJ, so we thought it would be nice to get some insight to see whether there's alternative definitions or whether people immediately get it because it captures that feeling for
Love
them.
that. What a great idea. Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I do have to add, though, I did really love going through them. I felt like with a lot of them, I was reading them, and it's like one word with one definition, but in my head, there was a whole like movie playing. Like it was a really sensory experience. So I think you really captured those meanings well.
Oh, bless you. Well, and that's why words are important. This is it's meant to be funny and light-hearted and all of those things. But when there isn't a word for something, it does kind of diminish that thing a bit. I was amazed. There's no word for a parent who's lost a child, for example. There's a word for a widow and so on, but there's no word for such a universal experience and something so hard to describe. So yeah, there's that in there, which I've coined the term solvents, which is an empty soul or an empty vessel. And I'm passionate about bereavement support, for example. And when there's something that doesn't even describe the feelings you have, how do you ever get through something like that? So I'm delighted you enjoyed them and can't wait to hear the meanings.
Yeah, no, I definitely also had similar experience, and I felt as you were speaking then, I was thinking about how validating it is to come across a word, even a word that already exists that you hadn't quite put into context yet, that really captures how you're feeling. Almost like when you listen to a song and you think it really captures, like articulates emotions that you were having better than you had managed to yet.
Like this was made for me.
Yeah. So I think that was kind of the feeling that I had going through the list, being like, oh my God, yeah, I literally had that yesterday.
We will talk a little bit more about the kind of reflections from the words that you've written and that kind of thing. But for now, should we look at what the panelists think the words mean? Let me just okay. So the first word that we chose was beeper phantom. And we have a clip from Judy from the panel who tried to define what it might mean.
I'm thinking of beeper phantom. I'm thinking of it as maybe something that you hear like very often, but it isn't actually true. So I would imagine maybe on the wards you hear like a beeping going off like so often that it kind of becomes like background noise. And then sometimes when you're like not at work, you can hear it at home.
Yeah, so that's what Judy thought. Matt, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I love that, and it's it's very true in many ways. I think there are some words which the kind of cadence of them or the mouth feel of them describe the word, a bit like the one I said before about the meaning of lifts from Douglas Adams about Kettering, but you'd never know what it means. I think this one, beeper phantom, it kind of describes what I was trying to get at, I guess, in the language itself. Beeper phantom is hearing your pager go off when it has not.
Yeah, it almost feels like an onomatopoeia. Yeah, which is fun.
Such a universal experience. And also outside of work, I remember once I was at a restaurant with my family, having been on call for the week prior, and the restaurant had one of those like alarms on the door that every time it opens, it was just like a little subtle beep. And my dad said every time it went off, I went like this because my beep was normally like on my like waistband, and he was like, "You need help. This isn't normal."
And there's a lot of words actually in the full online dictionary related to pages in particular and noises in medicine. There was also one to describe that kind of sudden thump of your heart the moment after the pager goes. There's one submitted by a colleague of mine in Canada about how the sound changes if you're leaning over and it's kind of muted by a roll of your stomach, for example. That was another one. And there's the opposite of beeper phantom, which is where your pager does go off, but you think it's something else, for example. I struggle going to many of these street food places nowadays, which hand you a little pager when your food is ready, and often I sit there waiting for it, and it's the same feeling as I get when the cardiac arrest pager goes off. My heart kind of skips a beat, and then I remember, oh no, I'm actually just getting a halloumi wrap or something, which is much better.
Quite different. The second word that we put in the group chat was cursor crawl. And we have again from Judy. She thought that it meant when you're procrastinating doing something, so you kind of just hover around it, like a cursor, which I thought was interesting. This one was a bit further from the meaning that you put, but it's fun to see how people can interpret things differently.
There's no right or wrong answers, is there? That's absolutely an experience I can identify with too, is what she described. And please submit a word to describe that. That'd be amazing.
I'll let Judy know to do that. And the definition that you put was the glacial pace of an ancient hospital computer waking up, during which you can measure time in heartbeats and watch your clinical urgency slowly evaporate. Do you have any experiences of that?
Every single day. And of course, the time you want it to work the fastest is always the time where it's the slowest. It's the most urgent things, or when you're waiting for that x-ray, you're worried about procedure you've just done, and you really want to make sure that drain is in the right place, and all of a sudden, it's having none of it. So it's a real frustration.
And you can try and be as proactive as you want. Like if you've got like laptops up, I'm always trying to get the next patient up as we're going up the stairs to the next ward, but obviously it just completely cuts out on the staircase, so your whole computer restarts by the time you get to the next ward anyway, right? Normally when you're on a round with like the scariest consultant. So
classic. I don't really make notes in that sense, but when I was on placement, the hospital I was at had a new computer system come in, and I just remember, like, for the first 3 weeks of placement, that, like, every day I'd go into a different ward, a different doctor, and every day it's like, the system is so rubbish, nothing works, I hate it, and it was just, like, half an hour spent complaining about the computer system, and then we'd get into placement. But yeah, so I guess that is quite a universal experience.
Yeah, and again, there are a few others related to computers. In fact, there was that delay of when you load an x-ray, for example, that you really want to see, and you want to see it's gone well, and that kind of split second before it flashes up is an experience. It certainly is for me, if you've done a tricky procedure, for example. There was another word which relates to how if you've got a works computer that you use all the time, you kind of adapt maybe your type into it, or you press slightly harder on one key or another, and then you come to a different computer, you come home, for example, and you're doing this weird thing on a laptop which actually works normally, and you've kind of adapted to this weird bug. So yeah, loads of computer related words there too.
Interesting that that's such a big part of clinical experience.
Definitely. I think we did a Sharp Scratch episode once about NHS IT. Back probably be 5 years ago, because if it was one of mine, but
maybe we need an updated version of that now.
Get on that.
Another word that we chose was hospibrew. I found this one really funny. I like this one. But Judy again was wondering whether it was a basic cup of coffee or tea that just about meets the threshold for being a cup of whatever it is. I thought that was quite funny as well. It's kind of like when you have the really basic stuff in like the common room, and it's like, what actually is this? But you need it for sustenance.
Love that. What a great. In fact, I think that is a better definition of this word that really describes it. Or the crazy instruments you use to stir a tea or a coffee. I've used all sorts of things. I won't tell you what in total. Or the kind of dust you find at the bottom of a bowl, which you use as coffee. There's so much related to that normal existence in a weird place in a hospital. So yeah, I love that definition. It's not the one I picked, but I think it's better.
I think the one that you picked is quite honestly probably a universal experience for people who even aren't like clinicians.
Hospibrew is that distinctive hospital smell equal parts reheated food and human waste.
Which is very visceral. But I think when you talk to people, like even in public, about like hospitals, like the first three things that they'd say is the smell. So I think that is probably something that really does stick to people.
Yeah, I think, this is, I've started saying the power of words, and you say that sentence to someone and universally their face changes. They sometimes take a step back, or they cover their nose. They do something which just makes you know they've smelt this. And it's, as you say, it's a universal smell. I've worked in multiple hospitals over the UK, overseas in Australia, and I don't know why. I don't know the science. Please, for future Christmas BMJs, can somebody who's skilled in olfactory science do some fancy experiments on this? It's a universal smell. We all know exactly what it means, and it's the same everywhere.
While it's a universal smell, I would argue it's worse on some wards than others. So I'm not
Agreed.
sure it's quite the same everywhere. Definitely like the gastro ward or like the colorectal patient ward might have a slightly more distinct smell. But
Agreed.
it definitely a baseline is universal everywhere.
Yeah, it's in the concentration of each
Yeah.
component, I think, is the key. Yeah.
I think an interesting one with this, though, not even related to this exactly, but I feel like there's a common thing of like people being shocked when like we eat, like just after seeing a really intense like a procedure or something, but it feels so normal. I wonder if you had a word related to something to do with that, or maybe something I should submit.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Certainly in going through medical school, and experience many people have had in terms of dissection and prosection. There's certain foods like sweet corn and tuna, which I certainly avoided for many years as a medical student. So that would be a good one, maybe.
Were you going to say the thing about how the smell of formaldehyde is supposed to make you hungry? So most people after my dissection at med school would all head out and buy food immediately after, like regardless of what time of day you were in the labs for. Like, it was always like, let's all go and eat now.
Such an odd experience.
It's really odd.
But yeah, so I feel like maybe we need to submit a word about that as well. And then another one, sorry, I'm just like throwing, I've got ideas now.
Real-time evolution of language.
I just recently watched House MD for the first time, which I did enjoy, but I used to watch it while I was eating, and my mum found that so odd. She was like, but you're looking at this, and it's like, it's just a TV
My
show,
sister,
yeah.
every time, like whenever I'm at home, like talking about my day or something to do with my life, there's always a point over dinner. She goes, Nikki, that's not appropriate dinner conversation. Like you have to, please. But sometimes you forget that it's not a normal thing to be talking about because of that. This kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, that really unique set of experiences that we have that become so normalized to us that you kind of lose sometimes for a moment which things are normal for other people. I sometimes notice with my school friends who are mostly non-medics that they'll ask me a question about work and then I'll answer and they're suddenly so shocked that that's something I have to do or something that I come across, or it's interesting.
I think it goes both ways, actually. And I've said I've got two girls who are 13, 16, and it always amazes them that in a home environment, if one of them has got a bleeding nose or so they've injured, I'm useless. I'm rubbish. I hate it. I can't deal with it. I can't look at it. And yet I've just come home and had, a hand in someone's chest or a tracheostomy or whatever else. And I think there is that kind of mask, that theatre, that protection of a system in a hospital, and you somewhat, fulfill a role and do a performance. And for different people, that can be in different areas. But for me, that mask then slips at home, and I think maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. I don't know, but it's certainly different.
It's probably somewhat healthy to be able to have that kind of separation, to not always be in that role.
Kind of like the idea of work-life balance, which we're going to be discussing in the next episode, actually. So that's exciting.
Sorry.
But I guess in terms of trying to leave work behind, maybe that leads us on to the next word, which is exit call, which I think is a good one that kind of like you can kind of get the idea of what it is. We had a few different people send in answers for them. Do you want to read them out?
Yeah, cool. I think I've got them here. Is there? We had another one from Judy, exit call, something that happens last minute, like you're about to go out and something changes the trajectory of the evening. And then Maz, one of our other panelists, said the last bleep I'm considering of the shift before they get left on red for the night team to take over.
Yeah, and they're all spot on. Exit call is the pager going off just as you're about to leave for the day.
And it always happens.
It always happens, and it's always the issue which can't be solved quickly. It's always the issue maybe you've been thinking or hoping doesn't happen, or the patient you think is going to get through and doesn't. And I often say, in the last 5 minutes of a shift, really, the only 3 things you should really do, especially if it's been a busy night shift, you should be able to go to the toilet, drink a cup of tea, or do CPR. Those are probably the only 3 allowable things to do, because actually at the end of a 13-hour shift, doing complex cognitive tasks or skill tasks is actually dangerous in many ways. So you should outsource those to fresh eyes. But it's always that last page which can't wait and needs something doing. There's another word which, from personal experience, we do night shifts in intensive care as consultants. We have pagers still. So I've been working in medicine for, 20 years, and I'm still carrying a pager and sleeping in hospital. And it's always after the night shift I forget to give that pager back. And it's gone off, at the top of a hill when I'm pretty far from the hospital. And that's an all new kind of sinking feeling that happens, which needs a word too.
And we picked one last word that we asked about in the group chat, and this one was life spill, which people seem to have quite different interpretations of.
One of the suggestions we had was Anna suggested that when you've had no time to do any shopping, so you might have to order your Tesco delivery midnight shift. And then she followed up with an alternative suggestion of when a patient tells you their life story instead of just answering the simple question you asked. And then she did caveat that with, that feels a bit mean though. So, but which led to an interesting discussion amongst our panelists about having to sometimes cut things short or draw a line because you have to prioritize other tasks. It's nice when you've got the time to have a yap and hear the full life story. But yeah, so that was one set of suggestions. I don't know if you want to read some more or discuss those first.
Yeah, maybe we'll discuss them. I found that interesting because it's kind of like, as a med student, all I could really do is talk to the patient. So for me, a life spill is any clinical day, and I quite enjoy it. But yeah. Matt, what do you think about the kind of guesses?
Yeah, great guesses. The one about a kind of a prolonged history. In fact, somebody submitted a word recently called polytwaddle, which is when you ask somebody a relatively straightforward question about, when did you start on this new tablet? And the response is, well, it all started in 1975. and they go through this really in-depth detail of their pets and where they've lived over the years, and
their
in
holiday
many
in
ways,
Tenerife.
yeah, and in many ways, it's brilliant. I love, it's beautiful, it's great. And then some other times you've got a million things to do, and you just want to know when they started frusemide. It's so that's the word polytwaddle. Yeah, I love those other definitions. The one that I came out with for life spill is the moment that you realize a patient has just told you something that they've never told anyone else. And, this happens all the time. The medical profession still has trust, actually, despite loss of trust in institutions. The loss of trust in individuals hasn't happened. So people feel they're able to tell you profound things sometimes. But it also goes the other way. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've certainly told patients things that I haven't told my best friend or people in my family. Often if it's something that relates to them or their illness, and has some call back to you or your family life. So I think life spill probably works both ways.
And actually links to one of the suggested definitions, because that experience of them opening up to you and telling you something they perhaps haven't shared before only really comes from having that time to listen when they're pouring out lots of extra information that perhaps you didn't directly ask about. And that comes back to like the kind of skill of interpersonal relations and history taking is sometimes you don't know what the most relevant thing is going to be, and that surprises you.
And I think overall it's such a beautiful experience, and it kind of links back to what we were saying at the start, that it does feel like such a privilege and an honor to be able to talk to these patients and get to know them in like such formative experiences for them. So yeah, I really like life spill and when it happens.
I guess the other thing to say is that, of course, language is this really powerful thing. Words so powerful. We said at the beginning, the limits of language, the limits of my world. But so much of the time, I meet patients and families where language isn't possible. At the edges of life, whether it's delirium or somebody who's had a stroke or someone who has dementia or someone who's dying, language crumbles, and they don't have that power. But actually, in many ways, when words falter like that, the meaning doesn't disappear. If anything, it's more important than ever. It just changes shape. So those words are then expressed in a physical gesture or in somebody's face or in an emotion. In a cry or a smile, for example. So although we've been talking about words and language today, I think actually it just describes that universal experience that's inside us all, and inside patients and families too.
Yeah, and how we express that. I was just thinking as you were speaking there, Matt, about my last job of F1. I was on a stroke rehab ward, which was a much kind of slower pace than my previous two jobs. But one of the things I really got from that job was the kind of MDT involvement of having like our SLT colleagues there, and the first of all having kind of whiteboards and different images to use, say if you wanted to assess a patient's capacity for a procedure, rather than it automatically being like, well, they can't repeat it back to me, but being like, okay, have we put everything in place to ensure that they could communicate whether or not they've understood back to us? So printing out kind of images so they can use those to point, and all of these different things, and making sure you take the extra steps to like allow for communication outside of words and language when that's no longer possible.
And I think there's so much about like what our responsibility is. I guess that communication is at the core of it. And I guess that human connection that we're able to build, all those things outside of language itself is important too. And I think like experiences I've had watching clinicians like with patients who might not speak English, or maybe who are hard of hearing, or like if they need an interpreter but the call has failed or something, how do you manage to continue to have those conversations when how you would have actually translated the words between you doesn't work? And I think that's such a big important part of what we do. And when it goes right, it feels really meaningful.
Yeah, and one amazing thing, I guess, to say, we've talked through all this and the power of words and how important it is. Now we're moving to online patient records and patient access to their own records, for example. And what's amazing is, certainly when I was in medical school, yes, communication skills was taught, often verbal communication skills and listening, but not writing at all. I was never taught how to write an outpatient letter or respond to a complaint or even write in the notes. And I think as we enter this new age, there's a movement which is about me to me. If you're writing about me as a patient, then you should write to me. You shouldn't write your letter to, dear Dr. So-and-so. It's about me. Write it to me. And I think that can also happen in inpatient notes, actually. I quite often write inpatient notes, which are around best interest discussions or end of life, for example, to that patient, even if that patient is critically ill or unconscious or dying. And that feels weird when you first do it. And now I've got to the point that it feels weird if I don't. And Nikki, I know you were saying that you've been teaching medical students about writing letters, outpatient letters, for example. And I think this is something medical schools and postgraduate organisations should absolutely, embrace. There should be a new specialty of scribology as well as cardiology and endocrinology.
I think it's been really interesting talking to you both and thinking about language, the limitations of it, and how we expand it and how that can help our clinical experience. And thank you so much for the words, Matt, and like giving us a backstory and the history or like the related words. It's been really interesting. And I will definitely put a message in the group chat for people to send in more suggestions. That's all we have time for this episode. So I wanted to thank you, Matt and Nikki, for joining. And thank you to the listeners. I hope you enjoyed it and were able to learn something too. If you enjoyed the episode, then make sure you subscribe. We have new episodes every 2 weeks. Happy holidays, and yeah, follow us on our social media, and I'll catch you next time. Until then, stay sharp.